Dr. Pat Williams, thank you so much for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy. It's so great to meet you.
My pleasure. Great to meet you both.
Yep, and yes, Richard here, and it is great. We've got you over here. Now, people won't see this on the podcast, but if they look at us on the YouTube channel, you are sitting there behind this fabulous sunset and scenery, which actually apparently is your backyard, which is absolutely beautiful. But you've brought us here, and you've got that wonderful joy and serenity and peace inside your head as well. Because I really love this book, this third edition of your book, talking about coaching, about life coaching, about the nature of therapists in it. And maybe just as a start, if we just sort of give you that generic open-ended question, how did you get into this? What led and gave rise to this this work, and the nature of the three editions arriving where we are here in 2023?
Well, I'll try to make the story short, but it's like when I went to undergraduate school I missed Psychology 101. I was late to enroll because I was out in a camping thing. And so the only class left was Psychology of Satisfaction. Whoa, that was when I started learning about Maslow and Rogers. And it's like, then I had to take Psych 101. It was Freud and B.F. Skinner. And I went, no, that's not me. So I went on to get my master's in humanistic psychology and then a doctorate in transpersonal psychology. By the time I was 27, and my dissertation was transpersonal psychology and the evolution of consciousness. But for what I knew at that time, it was the apex of the human potential movement in the 70s in America anyway. And then I became a psychologist, kind of like a sheep in wolf's clothing. I really didn't like giving people a label, diagnosing, et cetera. But in America, if you wanted to bill your insurance company, you had to have a diagnosis. 309.28, adjustment disorder with mixed emotional features, But I think I was always more coach-like before I knew the term coaching. I wanted to treat people more people to people, beyond the diagnosis, not just look at the illness, but what is it you want to get out of your way so you can live a more fruitful life. So that's what that. And then I heard about, I actually started doing executive coaching in 1990 as part of my practice, but it was like leadership development with newly promoted leaders, mostly men, in 1990. And I did the same thing with them in their office that I would have done if they'd come to my office, but they didn't want to park their Jaguar outside a shrink's office. So I went there and charged double. But I realize now that wasn't really coaching. It was a mixture of counseling, coaching, consulting. It was good. And then the coaching movement kind of started here in the early 90s. I heard about it. I'm a founding member of the International Coach Federation, one of their first master certified coaches. So I was able to, like a periscopic view, like a periscope, I could see around the corner, and I said, oh, this is going to be not a shift, but an additive service that people can get when they don't feel they're broken or hurt. So coaching was a way for people to have that confidential conversation with a well-trained person, and they didn't get a diagnostic label. So coaching, and now there's relationship coaching, ADD coaching, sports coaching, family coaching, business coaching, everything else. My book is about life coaching because that's what everybody does, even if you don't put that on your business card. Right. In fact, I recommend if you're going to get a job with the federal government or IBM or Microsoft, you probably don't want life coach on your business card, but it is what you do. Well, people don't even have business cards anymore, I don't think. But
yes, it does. But life is what we do.
Yes.
And there is this strange thing, and I used to say this. I remember years ago when I was talking about some aspects, and I want to talk a little bit more about what you're saying in there is the nature of coaching in relation to therapy. But I used to say that what a business wanted you to do was take your life off and leave that on the coat rack at the door, go
Yes.
in, function successfully for me,
Right.
screw all the rest of your stuff, then
Mhm.
go out. And of course, what people found, they found it harder and harder to get the jacket back on, get the life jacket back on again.
Mhm.
And so there's that intermingling of coaching for skills, coaching for capacity, and coaching for maintaining the integration. That humanistic. I am a person
Mhm.
at work. So, how did you find this flow as we're just getting back into the 90s there as you went in? Because there was a lot of hard-nosed, heavy-hitting coaching, like
Right.
this is how you will become the great success, follow the 5 steps. We still have that to an extent. What
Right.
was that like coming up? Because you sound like you were quite humanistic and not the mad aggressive.
Oh.
Well,
Well, I often tell people, I mean, my first book was Therapist as Life Coach, Transforming Your Practice. And I've got a story about Australia coupled with that too. But it was like therapists, psychologists were often made fun of. I mean, look at American TV, Bob Newhart, the movie What About Bob? Uh,
yeah.
there was not anything good until Ordinary People and then maybe Good Will Hunting. No psychologist was ever shown. Of course, in Good Will Hunting, Robin Williams threw his patient against the wall. So maybe
He was quite nuts. Yeah, it was great.
maybe that wasn't so good.
Yeah.
But it was, and coaching is the same thing. Some Saturday Night Live made fun of it. But if you come off as a professional and not a sales schmuck, coaching is not a promise to triple your income or get this and that. But it's been usurped. I mean, everybody calls themselves a coach now: money coach, relationship coach, sex coach, you name it. It's a term that is overused, and when people find out there's a real profession who has 60,000 members in 155 countries, then they know some people are well trained. I mean, that's just the International Coach Federation. There's other groups too. So it's evolved to the point where people don't say, "Oh, what sport do you coach?" It's beyond that. It's more in the public eye and ear now, I think.
And what I notice in the book as we go through, you give we utilize the terms of therapeutic techniques and therapeutic approaches, which
Right.
I think is more of the point. So you do blend it all the way through. But what I notice in this edition is that you spend less time, I don't know, explaining. Explaining. I as we mentioned before in one of the earlier editions, you actually had, what are the differences and similarities between coaching and therapy, trying to explain it. Whereas in this edition, I feel as though you're more comfortable with the fact that
Yes.
most of the reading public get it.
Yes.
So how about some of these things? As you whiz through the index, you can see these things popping out. Solution focused, humanistic, Maslow, Rogers. How have you managed that integration?
Well, I tell a lot of coaches who aren't familiar with psychological theory, like in the first chapter, and I've got a whole article on this I published elsewhere. Life coaching is the operating system and how it got influenced by psychological theorists from 1900 on. I mean, Freud had his inner circle with Adler and Jung and Assagioli, who left. They left because Freud got a little formulaic and other things. So
Yes.
they created their own more humanistic, more person-centered, more future-oriented kinds of theories. And those were my heroes: Adler, Jung, Assagioli, who created psychosynthesis, and then Rogers, Maslow, et cetera. So they are the fathers, and I could include Virginia Satir and Karen Horney. I mean, I like people to know about the masters who came before them that laid the groundwork. Maybe even Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. I mean, come on. So I want coaches to know enough about psychological theory and adult learning theory and other things to know, where does this come from? It wasn't just made up. And nowadays there's so much research and statistics, neurology. I put a lot in the new book about emotions and psychoneurology and, I mean, I could just say real quickly, in the early days of coaching was like, oh God, if your client starts crying or they look a little upset, you need to talk about them seeing a different professional. Why? They're not falling apart. They're just having a moment. I mean, they're not emotionally fragile if you've screened them, right? So I think coaching has become, well, I'm giving a talk to the Adlerian, North American Adlerian Society next week, and it's really Adler's principles on the importance of connection and significance. That's what people are getting with a coach. They're actually getting a sense of somebody who can listen objectively and confidentially, and the connection happens that may not get elsewhere. Well, and the pandemic magnified that. I mean, it magnified the loss of connection for people. So I don't mean to ramble so long, but I think coaching has evolved to the point where it's not a profession that will solve your problems. It's a profession where you have a conversation, several of them, where you explore who you are, what is your why, the why of why you're doing what you're doing, or what are you not doing that you wish you weren't. And the new era of what you mentioned earlier, Richard, is the adage of don't take your work home and don't take your home to work. That's out the window. I mean, you cannot do that. You cannot not do that. I mean, you are taking your work to home. Thankfully, there's a lot being written today about the importance of safe self-disclosure in the workplace, to empathy, emotional agility, and that's being trained and taught. Empathy, it's being embraced as an important human factor in success in the business world too.
Yeah. Pat, I'm sitting here listening, as a stereotypical psychotherapist, and I'm thinking, the coaching idea, sounds good. I think I probably, lean into that a little bit. So practically, what are the sort of things that I should be looking at doing to move more into that coaching mode? You mentioned the International Coaches Federation. Like, do I need to join a group like that? Like, what? Apart from reading your book,
read the book.
What do I need to do?
Well, I do think it's important for people to follow the profession, and the International Coach Federation has become the global. I mean, there's the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. There's Australian chapters of the ICF, and there's 187 some chapters around the world, which is great. Now, have they become a little bureaucratic? Of course. But the credentialing is more for the coach than it is for the client.
Right.
A lot of people won't ask if I'm credentialed unless they're a corporate entity that is requiring a certain level of certification. And that has increased.
Okay.
So I think what you need to do is take some introductory courses from a recognized training entity, which probably means they're stamped by the ICF as approved for their coach training. And then there's varieties of that. They can meet the credentials and you can get, there are all kinds of different training within the guidelines of the ICF, what it takes to be an accredited school, and then what it takes to be an accredited coach. There's 8 competencies, diluted down from 11. Actually, diluted's a bad word. They're reworded in a more
refined.
You're refined. Yeah. Thank you.
If I'm coming in as a, as a master's level, therapist with decades of experience. So I'm assuming that there's some, you're not sort of starting from zero. I'm not a 20-year-old who has no experience.
Right. That's why I started my school in 1998, because it was geared toward graduate degreed professionals who wanted to add coaching to their business. So our school in fact, the first edition of the book was Lessons from the Institute for Life Coach Training. And I changed the title this time because it's more global. But I think there are certain schools where a therapist trained person can find, no, you don't have to take a 12-week course on how to listen. You already know about ethics, you know about building rapport. So you're not starting at ground zero, but you do need to learn the intricacies and the nuances of what's a coaching conversation, because a lot of therapists will say, I need to let go of some of my expertise because I don't tell the client how to solve a problem. They're not here for therapy. They're here for coaching. So it's the context of the relationship. You will have different clients as a therapist than you have as a coach. Mostly.
What's a bit of a sort of a generic role play, but a description of it? So you're coming to my office. Well done. But anyway, you rock one way or the other, your office or mine. We come in, we sit down. What's sort of the way in which you approach that early opening engagement?
Well, if it's in person, my coaching for years was by telephone. Now it can be by Zoom. But if I was doing in person, by Zoom, by phone, it doesn't matter. It's like, I might say, Richard, okay, we both come from whatever we were doing before. Let's take a moment to get centered. Let's take a breath. Anything you need to say to kind of get rid of or leave outside the room before we get started? A short thing. Don't start with a big issue. Anything you need to let go of briefly, I'll sneak in there. And then say, how would you like to use our time today? We've got 45 minutes together. What did you bring for us to take a look at or explore? What I teach my mentees is, what do you want to discuss? No, I don't say, what do you want to discuss? Because that implies I'm going to be part of the discussion, and maybe you'll assume I'm part of the solution. I'm not part of the solution, but I am part of creating the environment for you to explore what you don't yet know.
Right. So you're a catalyst for.
Yes, that's a great word. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And those words you said there, exactly. I've been, this is my whole game as well. It is discovering what you don't yet know. So this, of course, takes us into what various descriptions. I mean, I just use the term possibility field.
Yes.
And that most of people, a lot of the times what I find is people are giving generic solutions. This is in therapy, but certainly in coaching. So, here's the way you'll solve your money problems. Here's the way you'll solve your company problems. But they're giving generic sort of solutions, or they're sitting back and trying to clean up the mess. But actually, as we see from Solution Focus, from certainly thing Roger said, certainly Milton Erickson was saying these things, it's actually the things that we don't yet know. If the solution were in what we're already doing, then we wouldn't be having coaching. So what is it like working with business people who seem to, depending on where they are in the company, seem to operate a lot in how do I do what I'm doing better?
Yes.
Rather than have that openness to how do I do something that I'm not doing? Is this a difficulty? I can see this as being a different bridge.
I do make a distinction, and it's actually early in the book, the distinction between transactional and transformational psychology. If you come in to finish writing your book or exercise more or learn these skills to move up to managerial status because you got promoted and now you're manager of the team you used to work with, that happens a lot. There's some skill sets that the people paying for your coaching may want you to achieve. Better peer communication, less, what do I get often? Less abrasiveness or something like that. Learn how to be better communicative. Okay, we can coach on those. But what else do you want? Because we can talk about anything, your family, your health, et cetera, that does not go in the report. So it is that can be the transformational. And here's what I teach my students and now my mentees that I train going for certification. Transformational coaching is essentially letting yourself go deeper And I use the metaphor of snorkeling in the Caribbean or the Great Barrier Reef, because I was one of my first time I ever scuba dive was in the Great Barrier Reef. I'm not going 100 feet deep. That's a little scary, and I have to have somebody with me. But snorkeling is just looking under the surface, which can also be a little scary the first time for people. There's beauty, there's newness, and then maybe a shark floats by or something. Not a white, but a nurse shark, hopefully. Yeah. But it's a clear view. So the snorkeling metaphor is a new clear view, and it's just what's right under the surface. So we do go for, here's the psychological term, what's in the unconscious. What do you not yet know? Not the deep, dark unconscious, but what have you not yet discovered that our query can get to? And I tell people, it's not that the client hasn't told you because they don't want to, they don't yet know what it is. It comes from the exploration. Solution focused therapy, often when the solution was had, they were done. Well, that's where coaching can start. I solved this problem. Now what? Now I can create the bigger picture of my life. What's down? I solved this problem that was holding me back, whether some psychological diagnostic category. Erickson's a great example of, he didn't even know what he was doing, and neither did Virginia Satir or Fritz Perls. That's why NLP, that's why they studied them. They were doing magic without understanding it. Yeah. I love Milton Erickson's work, and a lot of it was questions or stories or metaphors. I do a lot of that in coaching, and I have that embedded in the book. Coaching is about the unconscious. They don't use that word a lot, but it is. And then creating the future the client wants. They create it. Yeah. And you'd give a try, you try something and you get some results. That's all it is, results. It's not failure. I don't use that word. What did you learn?
Yeah. I know Matt, I know Matt's champing. I can see his face, but just quickly drop in. My mentor was Ernest Rossi.
Okay.
So Milton, I'm, two steps of whatever it is, 6 degrees, 2 degrees.
Yeah. So I studied with Bill O'Hanlon, who was Milton Erickson's gardener.
We know Bill well.
His training. Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We're Ericksonian boys. Yeah. Sorry, Matt. I just wanted to say that to Pat.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit about in terms of maybe it's energy. I'm not sure. So a lot of my work has been, with trauma, psychopathologies, personality disorders, and there's a certain energy that's required and is taken from you, and then when I have done things which are probably erring more toward what you've just been describing in terms of coaching, I actually receive a lot of energy from that. And I'm wondering if, what sort of observations you've made with yourself when it comes to doing coaching versus more traditional psychotherapy.
Oh, absolutely. God bless the people that really see the difficult therapy cases. I used to specialize in post-traumatic stress, sex abuse survivors, crash victims, veterans. And now I'm doing a lot of research. I don't do the research. I like the executive summaries and the results. That's what I like. Post-traumatic growth has become a big thing. The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, that whole thing he's doing is fabulous. If I was doing severe trauma work at the end of and I would be drained by the end of the day.
Yeah.
And in coaching, we're actually energized because we're working, but we're working at an artistic level that's it's got a flow to it. And I tell my students, if you're exhausted or tired, you work too hard. It doesn't mean you're not working hard, but you're trying to get in there and figure out the client's problem and come up with something, so that even if a client is silent, just be quiet. And then you might say, what's coming up? We're not trying to fix a diagnosis. So you're right on. I could add a little adage at this point. You may want to edit this, but I first came to Australia in 94 with my 2 daughters, post-divorce, but I was at a Rotary conference in Melbourne. I was the president, so I got to come for free for those 4 days. And then we stayed 3 weeks, and my daughters never forgot that trip. No reservations, no plans, and it was great. Then in 2003, after my first book came out, I was hired to go up and down the coast at different colleges by Spoken Word, I think they were called. He went out of business, but I had a great trip that year. Spoke at 5 colleges, psychologists, master social workers in the audience. And that was when I met Anthony Grant and Michael Cavanaugh at University of Sydney, who had the first coaching program. Anthony has since passed away, but Michael Cavanaugh is still doing his thing. So they had a coaching program based a lot on solution-oriented approaches and Rogerian theories, but applied to a coaching frame. So I went, wow, this is amazing. Then I came back in 2007, I think, and keynoted at a conference in in Brisbane. So it was great to see how global coaching came, and fond memories of those trips I have from
fantastic.
long trips, but worth it.
Yeah. And coaching is big here in Australia.
Yes.
So it just getting back to terms of energy, what sort of drains you and what gives you energy. I think it's probably it would be something to consider if you're a therapist and you are feeling a little drained because you're dealing with some to add in, sort of this coaching element,
Right.
even if it's, to give you some energy back.
Yeah, you don't have to quit being a therapist if you love your work, but you might want a few clients who are coming for some sort of life transformation or leadership skills or transition. I mean, we're all in transition, right?
Yeah.
It's but they're not broken. I mean, a lot of people came to a therapist, mostly women came to a therapist to have that conversation about changes they wanted to make. Well, today that can be done with a coach, a trained coach.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point to bring up there. I mean, we there was a sort of I suppose with a derogatory term but just a difficulty of understanding, where we talked about the worried well.
Yes.
And so a lot of therapists, more in America, you just go to see your therapist. Whereas actually what you just needed was a degree of not so much repairing of the past, but of opening up towards the future, which is certainly what I'm hearing in there. And certainly the work Matt and I are encouraging therapists to do is to broaden their understandings, to broaden their which is why we've got you on, because we want this subject to be discussed as well. And in that context, that nature of one of the things you were saying a little earlier, if a client moves in towards something that's a little bit more therapeutically oriented, so ruptures, past ruptures that are needing to have some work, what sort of recommendations do you have for as you're teaching people to come through? I mean, I'm imagining that you might be able to, just because you've got the skills and you've had the understanding, you could sort of chop and change a little bit through a session. But what's the process for someone who's come through a coaching only type of training? What do you advise them, and how do you help them work with that?
Yeah, let me first answer just real quickly. So if a therapist wants to add coaching to their repertoire, that's smart. So you expanding your business by having a description of services you offer that's not therapy but coaching. And a lot of therapists do that these days. I provide this, and this. To your second question is, if a coach is not trained in psychotherapy theory or modalities, I try to make it well known. I mean, I write articles for the ICF and top 10 ways you'll know if a client needs to be referred elsewhere, things to watch out for ethically, etc. But if somebody just has an emotional challenge comes up in coaching, you talk about it and they get a little tearful, or they might talk about how pissed off they are at an employee. I teach my students, don't label that. Just say, I noticed your energy really shifted. What are you feeling? What are you experiencing right now? I don't say, oh, you must be feeling sad. That's my interpretation. I might be right, but I want them to tell me, what are you experiencing right now? the other part of your question is there are times that people, I mean, life happens, right? So somebody might have, I had a client who I had for 4 years in different phases of her career, and then her son got killed tragically in a train accident. And I got an email from her. She said, "Hey, doc, here's what happened. I really need to talk to you today." So she said, "Hey, doc," I said, "This is not going to be coaching." But she was in a group with her husband. They were doing their therapy stuff. She just needed me to hear for a few sessions what happened and not talk about career, not talk about anything we were talking about. So it was like I could be that committed listener, but I'm not going to switch to being the therapist, especially if I'm not trained to be so. And so we try to have coaches who don't have a therapy background understand a little bit about when to refer, how to know how to refer. You don't want to say to your client, I think you need to see a therapist. We should stop. No, that's a little cold. You say, would it be helpful for you to have a interview with another professional? I mean, it could be their priest. It could be a counselor. It could be, but let them pick. What do you mean? Well, have you ever seen a therapist? Do you know how to contact a counselor? Would it be helpful for you to have a deeper look at this? Some people can do that and continue coaching. Some people need to put the coaching on hold, either financially or energetically, and then come back to it. So it's not a forced sort of thing, but it is done with compassion.
Yeah, I mean, I keep getting terribly pleased, and why I think I was drawn to your work is exactly that aspect. I mean, I actually think psychotherapy and counseling, we've got to back off and be more responsive. And we're doing a lot of work, and we've put some stuff in our book about that. And there's a lot of that in what you're saying. Going, the Ericksonian stuff, as you know, find what's within the client, that they help them find what they're just having trouble finding.
Right.
But then there are frameworks. There are things that through the training that you're doing, where you need to take them to. And there was that one where there's that transpersonal, that transactional, and that transformative. Is there anything? I wonder if there's anything more, just to give some clarity of what helps you recognize when you're working with a client, what frameworks you're using. And I know they can dart in and out fairly rapidly, but are they distinctions, or what do you find it in the work?
Well, when I say again, as I write and teach, it's like most clients, if not all, will come to coaching and say what they want and this is what I want to get. But that turns out not to be it. I mean, 90% of the time, I just made that up, 90%, but a lot of the time it is not what they want, but they don't yet know. So it's not really the problem. It's not really, I want to make more money, or I want to have this job be better. Maybe what they really want is to move to another state and work for a different company, or quit I mean, you don't know what it is yet. So that's one thing. And the second thing is to get the self versus the doing versus the being. So a lot of people might come for their job, or they're referred for their job, but who are they really? I used to have a person who taught with me. We'd ask this question. So what do you want for your life? I mean, let's have you let's go for some life purpose distinctions. He said, what if it's really, what does your life want for you? I went, whoa, that's a little transpersonal, but it's a great question. If we're called to do something, which Jung said usually came after 40, nowadays that's not even midlife yet. But you have to have lived a life for a while to have coaching make sense, or to be a coach. You can't be 20 years old and know your life purpose, or be ready to coach others on making big changes. So that's a lot being said about that, but they're all individual. If there are specialties within coaching, let me just stop with that. If I hire a health and wellness coach, I expect them to know something about health and wellness, but I'm not wanting them to tell me how to do my health and wellness. I might want that, but they're going to educate me. That's not what I do. I know some things about it, and I might send you an article based on a discussion, but it's going to be about your lifestyle choices. What is it you'd like to change? What's standing in your way? What have you tried that didn't work? And I mean, it's more than that, but you get deeper and deeper into what the client wants. It's not just losing weight, it's this, not just managing my diabetes, it's more than that. So, or if I hire a business coach, I expect them to know about business, right?
Yeah. But regardless of whether you're, coaching a business person or someone, or a sports person, or someone who wants to lose weight, there's a broad general approach at Coach's
Yes.
Catalyst, right?
Yes.
Where you've got those very clever exploratory questions that you're relying on across the board. Yeah.
Right. Very, very true. Very true.
And that humanistic approach is always shining out. What's the humanity? What's the broader expression? I mean, we talk, Matt and I talk a lot about trying to think more in the way of systems rather in the way of
Yes.
simple cause and effect. And so
Right.
almost always the thing you see on the surface, there's almost always something else, which
Right.
is,
I agree.
yeah. Well,
Here's another
what you're
interesting
saying.
perspective that helps with me being good grief. I actually trained, Carl Rogers was actually one of my teachers in the master's program. He was a guest lecturer,
Wow.
Well, his stuff, empathic listening, unconditional positive regard, et cetera, that sounds like coaching's motto today. We believe the client is whole, resourceful, and capable. Well, that sounds like unconditional positive regard to me. And empathic listening is what we teach. And then you've got, this is a funny short story. The first conference I went to in Europe in 2000 was in Switzerland. First time I'd ever been to Europe, and I was doing a workshop in the ICF conference in Grindelwald. And this young woman from, I don't know where, but she was a young coach, and she did this workshop on this new technique to get the client to understand what's deeper, the empty chair technique. And I listened to it. I went up, I said, do you know the origin of that? No. I said, well, Fritz Perls kind of created that with his Gestalt work, and it worked great, but you might want to know the history of it. So I don't know where she came. There's funny things like that all the time. It's like, no, you didn't put that up.
Yeah, there's always this stuff. Look further. I read a nice little book a little while ago, and I thought, I would love to be the resounding genius, but let's have a look and see if perhaps someone had thought of it before me. And I go back with Plato, his allegory of the cave. And I thought, and then they made some movies about it in The Matrix. Oh, well, there you go. A well-founded idea was my conclusion. But it is that it's uncovering the depths that we already possess, because and I think this we're probably getting to a point now where our time is coming to a close, but this idea, I mean, I just love that, the whole, resourceful and capable. That's just a beautiful expression of what many people have been saying to us, and I'm not sure we're listening too hard to. So that's beautiful. But is there something, Pat, we've missed, or is there just a little wrap up you'd like to do for us before we wind up?
For your audience, I think they would enjoy that today. There's a lot out there about what they call parts work, in internal family systems, voice dialogue. And I'm going, okay, well, Asa Jolie had subpersonalities, and Fritz Perls had his dream work, and Virginia Satir had people. It's not like a new concept. It's just reworded. In fact, James Fadiman, who I also had some graduate training with, wrote a new book called Your Symphony of Selves, just out last year. Great book. And that's what it's about. It's the parts work is something that is internal dialogue. What does your angry self say? I mean, I've got this dragon here that represents my, the flame throwing dragon that I learned was the anger part of me that is misunderstood. I don't really throw flames out all the time. So it's that kind of, it's good to know where the theories come from, and they're not just made out of nothing, Coaching is built on the wise masters of the past from varieties of theories that you guys know that I don't know, but it's not just pulled out of thin air.
Yeah, know your history. It's important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have nothing against repackaging it for a new generation to grab hold of,
Exactly.
but know where it's come from. Yeah.
Yeah, know the history and look carefully at the human being that it comes from. Yeah.
Bingo. Right.
Absolutely. Pat, I can't thank you enough. It was just a glorious. There were some wonderful recollections, wonderful discussions, some practical stuff, some beautiful catchphrases. It was just a delightful interview. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Pleasure. Very, very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Pat Williams, thank you so much for being here on the Science of Psychotherapy. As always, we'll leave links in the show notes for everybody, so you can check out Pat's book and his website. But Pat, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.